Well, today we're going to look at the Mexican War, California Gold Rush, and the 1850 Compromise. Look at how manifest destiny, the American desire to expand outward, how it reaches Mexico and the American Southwest, how that territory is added to the United States, but the very serious problem that creates, the new imbalance that creates in the United States. So we go back to Texas.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite places.
And it was annexed by the United States in 1845. It is made a state in December, 28th state in the United States. It is admitted as a slave state, as abolitionists feared. Texas settlers had no desire to free their slaves. But as it turns out, Texas would actually be the last slave state admitted to the Union. But Mexico had warned repeatedly that if the United States annexed Texas, it would go to war with the United States, because Mexico never recognized Texas' independence. Texas existed as an independent republic for 9 years. It's done a good portion of that trying to get annexed to the United States. Texas that it was annexed was agricultural, rural. It could barely defend itself. The only reason it really survived was the fact that Mexico was so deeply divided and so deeply distracted. Mexico is in almost a constant state of upheaval and civil war. I think we've noted before that the average term of a Mexican president between 1823 and 1862 was 9 months. But Texas was annexed, and Mexico initially only sent their official protests over. Wasn't willing to do a lot about it.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Define annex, please.
Annex. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Annex means to add.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I hear the term buildings referred to as an annex. It's referred to as an addition.
Correct.
But part of the big concerns were over the border of Texas. Of course, we're covering a lot of issues here: Mexican War, Nicholas Crist, Wilmot Proviso, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, California Gold Rush, 50 Compromise, Fugitive Slave Act, some other issues: Underground Railroad, Nat Turner Rebellion, Gadsden Purchase, Kansas-Nebraska Act. Anyways, Texas, late in its period of affiliation with Mexico, tried to establish itself as an independent state away from the state of Coahuila. Officially, it was Coahuila, Texas. But Texas tried to set itself up as a state within Mexico, independent of Coahuila, then as an independent country, but for Texas, Gulf Coast, Texas claimed the Rio Grande as its boundary. Oh, it's always such a dark state to draw. Should I get the coastline right? We'll say for laugh that's the Rio Grande. But Mexico says the border was the Nueces River. New Orleans. So you got this territory in between here that's deeply disputed. Of course, the Rio Grande, that includes most of what is now eastern New Mexico, the Albuquerque and Santa Fe areas. Texas could never establish a claim on the Santa Fe area of New Mexico, but nevertheless still claimed it. And of course, since Texas is being annexed, the United States is assuming Texas' claim on all this territory. There's the idea of manifest destiny, the idea that the United States is going to encompass the whole of North America one day. It's God's will the United States expand. Mexico, though, is still trying to hold on to it, desperately trying to hold on to its own territory. Mexico came independent from Spain in 1821. It included everything all the way down from the Oregon border all the way down to Panama. 1829, it loses Central America. It's still trying to hold on to its northern territory and even its southern territory. Yucatan's always threatening to secede. Other areas threatening to break away. Mexico's just trying to hold on. Well, here's what happens is President James K. Polk, once Texas is annexed, sends a party of U.S. Army troops down to the Rio Grande.
Sir, when you mention President Polk, you mean the Young Hickory?
Mm-hmm. Young Hickory himself, President James K. Polk, elected president in 1844. Called Young Hickory because his protege was Andrew Jackson. They called Old Hickory. Jackson's kind of grooming him through politics. Polk became governor of Tennessee. As the general in charge of this expedition was General Zachary Taylor. Called Old Rough and Ready because, like I say, rarely wear a uniform, always look kind of unkempt and dirty, just showing up ready to go anytime. Kind of rough around the edges. Well, in May 1846, a party of Army troops and Mexican soldiers met at the Rio Grande. A skirmish broke out. A couple of our troops were wounded, a couple of their troops were wounded. The incident was reported back to Washington, and President Polk declared that American blood had been shed on American soil. And this is disputed territory. Polk is claiming this is ours. We're going to claim it. We're going to defend it. Except for the United States, negotiation was simply not an option. Mediation, not an option. It's our territory, we're taking it. So the United States declared war on Mexico, and they called it the Mexican War. Now, there are some concerns about this because, on paper, the Mexican military looked very strong, very powerful. These are professionally trained troops, an army of about 32,000. U.S. Army in 1846, 7,000. So immediately, Polk starts calling out for volunteers. And people are jumping out of the woodworks to volunteer. Thousands upon thousands of people ready to join this fight for manifest destiny in the U.S. of A. Arkansas's congressman at the time, Archibald Yale, resigned from Congress, became a colonel in the Army, and charged in battle with a troop from Arkansas. Yale, however, was killed in battle at Battle of Buena Vista in 1847. And above all, American forces swelled from 7,000 to more than 104,000 by the time it was all over.
And that's the number of what?
So American troops altogether, volunteers and regular forces. As an end to all this, Mexico's trying to just maintain order. So its army was good, but it's kind of the point is it's hopelessly outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Two main American generals of this force were General Taylor and General Winfield Scott. Scott got his career started in the War of 1812. He was excellent officer by any definition. Troops called him Old Fuss and Feathers because he's very stuffy, very by the book, but got the job done. Brave and very determined man. As American troops organized, they stormed into Mexican territory. You have one force led by Colonel Stephen Kearny, as you can see here on page 4 or 5, moving from Missouri and eventually reaching Santa Fe, New Mexico, seizing that territory, making that claim for the United States. You have Colonel Fremont. He moves into California in 1846. Basically trying to rouse the few American settlers in the region to rise up against Mexico. The thing is, though, while the population was mostly people of Mexican descent at this point, living in that territory, basically California still belongs to Mexico at this point. There were just enough American settlers to cause problems. Fremont stirred them up, and the launch came to be called the Bear Flag Revolt. American settlers in California rose up, declared themselves to be independent of Mexico, and threw out all Mexican forces in California. Called the Bear Flag because the flag was actually very simple. It had a star in the middle and just a big bear in the middle of it. What does that look like? A turtle. And words California Republic underneath it. That's the same general design as the modern state flag of California today. Yeah. Turtle actually looks like a bear. This is why this is not an art class.
That's right. You could draw your bear, but it'd take a while.
Yeah. But this illustrates our purposes. Anyway, so California and New Mexico quickly in American hands. America starts pushing into northern Mexico. Mexico has several fierce battles, but the Americans end up winning each time. Taylor pushing steadily south into Coahuila, moving down towards Mexico City. And in 1847, General Winfield Scott tries a daring amphibious landing at Veracruz, basically kind of retracing the steps of the Cortez expedition in 1519. It's going from Veracruz and going through the mountains to Mexico City, because the bulk of Mexico's forces are here against Taylor's thrust from the north. Well, Mexican forces are under General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. He was the one that faced Texas forces during the Texas Revolution. Battle of Alamo, was captured at San Jacinto. Eventually, he was released back to Mexico. Lopez was supremely arrogant, called himself the Napoleon of the West. Getting also Napoleon lost. Was president of Mexico on 11 different occasions. Sometimes elected, sometimes overthrowing somebody, occasionally resigning after he felt like everything was under control, and then, not like what his successor did, coming back into power. He's also an opium addict. Well, at Battle of Cerro Gordo, just outside of Mexico City, Santa Anna faced Scott. Scott overwhelmed what remained of Mexican forces and marched into Mexico City. So just a little after the year began, all of Mexico is basically under American occupation. In fact, most casualties from this war were actually from illness and caused by bad sanitation in army camps. That actually was the case for most wars up until the 20th century. Well, but now they have to basically end the war. They have to turn it off somehow. And here's the problem, though, is Mexico's lost. It's no, it's lost, but they can't find anybody to sign the surrender papers. People in Mexico are proud and patriotic people, but no one wants to sign the papers admitting defeat. That's where this man comes from, Nicholas Trist. He was sent down to by President Polk with $2 million to try to expedite peace negotiations. They tried to come to some kind of agreement. Well, Trist spent months trying to find somebody who's even willing to negotiate with them. American occupation's a fact. And he's having trouble getting any kind of progress with this. Finally, by January of 1848, he's found somebody who's willing to talk and act on behalf of the Mexican government. But by this point, though, you have these manifest destiny believers here in Washington saying to President Polk, forget these negotiations, just annex the whole thing. Make the whole thing United States territory. All of Mexico to the United States. Polk was starting to listen. Polk, like Tyler before, believed in manifest destiny. Believed in American expansion, that America, a great rising power, needs to expand to realize its true greatness. That it's God's will that America be a great and powerful nation, encompassing all of North America, and Mexico just be step one. So, Polk is actually getting ready, is actually sending a message down to Trist to tell him, annex the whole thing. But Trist is already deep in negotiations. By February 1848, he's already signed a treaty before it even reaches, before the message even reaches Trist. And of course, what would have been the problem the United States had annexed Mexico? We'd have a lot more land, but what would happen as a result? See, you have to realize the United States in 1848 is an English-speaking Protestant nation. Made up mostly of people of English, Irish, and German descent. Scattered other areas. Mexico is mostly Roman Catholic, Spanish-speaking. Most people of a mix of Spanish and Native American descent. And bulk population is what they call a mestizo, which is a combination of Spanish and Native American ancestry. Native Americans were persona non grata in the United States. So while the United States might have won the war and been able to annex all of Mexico, and no one would have objected in 1848, the problem the United States would have faced is that it had to hold the population in place by force. Well, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, you can see here on page 4 or 5, was ratified by the U.S. Senate. Polk was kind of disappointed we didn't get the whole thing, but here's what happens is Mexico agrees to the Texas border at the Rio Grande. It also agrees to cede the territory basically north of the Gila River. Of what is now California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, most of northern Arizona, and western New Mexico. Remember, this includes eastern New Mexico. Because they all in Mexico. And yes, Greece and U.S. will pay $5 million to Mexico for the area of the modern American Southwest, area called the Mexican Cession. The cession being, starting to see, means the area it's giving up.
Mm-hmm.
But the U.S. also agrees that any Mexican citizens living in this territory would become American citizens and their rights would be respected. Certain people have been living there under Spanish and Mexican rule for over 200 years by this point. Been there for a very long time. You see, had some farmsteads and ranchsteads going back a couple hundred years by this point. The problem, though, was once this area is annexed, its Mexican citizens, now American citizens, see, over the next several decades, their rights ignored, their property stolen through fraud and just outright theft, all with the approval of the United States and territorial governments. Why? Because they weren't white. So while the intention was good of Mexico to try to make sure the rights of the people here were respected, the United States agreed to it. Never really happened. But that is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Now, all its territories annexed to the United States. But now the United States has to figure out what to do with all this land. See that whole area from West Texas all the way out to rest of California, mostly desert and mountain. So a lot of good natural resources in there. Some good land for ranch land in there, but traditional Eastern style farming is not going to happen. It's too dry. Still, the question is, what are you going to do if that territory remains? Now, one portion of this whole treaty negotiation process was hampered by this right here, the Wilmot Proviso. See, just a couple months after the war began, on August 8, 1846, President Polk sent a request for $2 million to Congress to expedite peace negotiations with Mexico. Eventually he's going to get his money, but he's asking initially for Congress to give him this money. Well, up arises a David Wilmot. Congressman from Pennsylvania, Democrat, rises with the stipulation that Congress will give President Polk his money on the condition that Any territory gained from this war with Mexico, remember it's still 1846, not sure what they're going to gain, but they're feeling pretty good about themselves about it. That any territory gained from Mexico would remain free territory. Or remain free territory. Now, slavery is outlawed by Mexico in 1829. So slavery is gone from that whole area. So basically, no more slaves be introduced in that territory. Basically, the belief among a lot of Americans that once slavery is ended in an area, it's not coming back. That's it, the end. Slavery basically slowly be erased from an area and die a natural death. Wilmot, Northern, believing that. He's coming from a state that has just ended slavery itself through a gradual process. Now, being a Democrat, he believes in manifest destiny. He believes in expansion of the United States, but doesn't believe in expanding slave territory. Write that down here. Any territory gained from Mexico would remain free territory. Since the North dominates the House of Representatives, the provision passes easily, but it gets held up in the Senate. We have that balance between the northern states and the southern states. So it's blocked in the Senate, so Polk doesn't have his money. Well, in December, Polk tries again. Polk says to Wilmot, his fellow Democrat, saying, look, you've made your point here, but we've got to get this situation in Mexico settled. So it's a favor for his president. He withholds the proviso, but somebody else steps forward and introduces it. It again passes the House, but fails in the Senate. So immediately, arguments over slavery arising. John C. Calhoun, now the senator of South Carolina, denounced the provisos and called it infringement of slaveholders' rights to enter the territories of their property. They're saying, if you make slavery illegal in an area, it means slaveholders can't go into that territory with their property, saying it's denying their basic rights. Of course, the irony here is ignoring the rights of the slave. But of course, the obvious logical fallacy of that argument. Some things in some local areas are legal in some areas and illegal in others. So, there's an obvious problem there is, somebody says it's illegal in their area, you have to respect that. You can't say, well, it's legal in some little territory where I like what they have to say about the law, and therefore you have to agree with that no matter what. Due process. Respecting local police rights. Local rights. But increasingly, Southerners are agitating for expansion of slave territory because they're looking at the numbers. The North is growing rapidly. There are no more slave territories left to come into the United States. They see slavery growing in their own states. The number of free states growing around them. So what's their feeling here? Surrounded. And those fears are starting to creep into all these debates. So what ends up happening with the Wilmot Proviso is slavery is now going to surround every political argument from this point forward, for the next 15 years. No matter what it is, it's going to come down to slavery. No matter what issue, slavery is going to be poking around the corner. The issue is now going to be forever politicized. Now, since the settlement of the Missouri question in 1820, sectional tensions between North and South went into the low simmer. But it's starting to change rapidly. Now, Polk and others tried to defuse the situation by suggesting the Missouri Compromise line, the border between Arkansas and Missouri, the 30-minute line, just be extended all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Basically, anything north of that, free territory, anything south of that, slave territory. Problem solved. Seemed very simple. But the issue starts as destroying the Whig Party between the Northern Whigs and the Southern Whigs. The Northern Whigs are outright abolitionists. Increasing numbers of Democrats are upset over the issue. Northern Democrats against Southern Democrats. Well, into this enters Senator Lewis Cass of Michigan. Senator from Michigan. Besides a way that politicians can solve this problem without actually having to deal with it. That solution was popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty is the idea that, in his words, that the territories regulate their internal concerns in their own way. Basically, Congress just washes its hands of the issue and lets the individual territories basically vote. I think it'd be free territories or slave territories. So that way, the democratic process prevails. People have spoken one way or another. End of story. Once the vote has happened, that's the end. And through this, of course, Congress avoids having to make any hard decisions. So they don't have to get criticized for deciding one way or another. It's simply leaving it up to the local areas. The most obvious problem with that, though, is twofold. One, the Constitution says Congress will regulate the territories. It says that very specifically. And can Congress hand that over to the territories? Yeah, but ultimately Congress has that responsibility. Second problem. When you are in a political office, you have to make hard decisions. That's the job you have to do. You can't make a hard decision if you're too afraid of what people back home might say, afraid you might lose your job because of it. Probably the wrong job for you. If you just want to do anything the crowd says, just to stay popular, no matter what a dumb idea it might be, probably not the person that should be trusted with that kind of power and authority. Sometimes you have to make a hard decision. Sometimes not always a popular decision. But you have to think long term. Because you'll have politicians today saying, well, we need to do what our founding fathers believed in and not compromise with anybody. That's what the founding fathers believed. They believed in compromise. Washington himself said that the capital should be a place where men resolve their differences. The idea of consensus, coming to an agreement. Compromise is what founded the Constitution. Certain things you can agree on. Eventually comes to a point that you have to make a hard decision. Now, popular sovereignty didn't directly challenge slaveholders' access to the territory, but the belief was non-slaveholding farmers come to dominate the territory, and eventually they will vote to become free territories. But a lot of northern politicians quickly endorsed the idea. Some didn't. Some said, now's the time to make the hard decision about slavery. say that it's wrong, say it is no more, that we are not going to allow it to expand any further. The line must be drawn here. Well, now you go to 1848, election year. Polk, who had achieved all of his major goals as presidency, was exhausted after one term, declined running in 1848. Came into office with three major goals: the independent sub-treasury for to replace the Bank of the United States, annexation of Texas, annexation of Oregon. Got all three. That in 1,000. That kind of record, yeah. Happy, satisfied, can ride off in the sunset. Fortunately, his health declined more than perhaps anybody realized, and 3 months after he left office, June 1848, he's on a speaking tour of the country, drops dead. Frankly, though, Polk was really the most successful one-term president in American history. He did accomplish a lot. Well, the Democrats nominate Lewis Cass, the author of Pauper Sovereignty, for president. Cass, popular, likable. But the problem was the convention refused to endorse Pauper Sovereignty. So controversial that not even the party wouldn't even endorse its own nominee's own signature idea. Whereas it needed a 2/3 majority of the delegates to approve the motion. They simply passed a resolution condemning all efforts to bring the question of slavery before Congress and denying the power of Congress to interfere with slavery in the territories. The Whigs, so deeply divided, they just give up on all the regular candidates, decided to go with a war hero. They're going with Zachary Taylor. That was their platform in 1848. Mom, apple pie, American, Zachary Taylor. Basically, the platform was we endorse the Union, the Constitution, and Zachary Taylor for president. Taylor from Louisiana, lived in Louisiana, had 100 slaves, never voted in a national election. Never voted once in his life. So the Army tradition at that point was you respect the civilian chain of command is considered to be unseemly in the military culture for American military culture for soldiers to have political opinions because you obey the civilian government. So Taylor never voted. Now here's the thing though. Abolitionism was still considered to be too radical of an idea for many people. But stopping the expansion of slavery in the territories is an idea a lot of people could rally around. Northerners were uncomfortable with the idea of slavery, didn't want outright abolition. You have to remember, there's racism in North and South. It manifests itself in very different ways. And so the idea of stopping expansion, the Northwest Ordinance, the Missouri Compromise, provided strong precedents. So you have a third party emerging, the Free Soil Party. On that basis, combining rebellious Democrats, anti-slavery Whigs, that are called the Conscience Whigs, and members of the Old Liberty Party, the Abolitionist Party. What ends up happening is they nominate former President Martin Van Buren. Van Buren was a free soiler, believed in stopping the expansion of slavery. His vice presidential candidate was Charles Francis Adams, son of John Quincy Adams. Ironically uniting a Jacksonian with an Adams, very unusual political alignment. Free Soil Party's platform was free soil, free speech, free labor, and free men. Well, Cass had a lot of problems uniting the party behind him. Whigs made fun of him. They had this song they sung about Lewis Cass, said he was 1/4 seed and 3/4 ass.
I like that.
But they'd be clever back then. Whigs poked fun at Cass But the results of the Free Soil Party was mixed. It allowed Taylor to win in New York, but allowed Cass to win Ohio. Van Buren is getting 10% of the vote. No electoral votes, but Taylor pulls out a very narrow victory. 47.4% of the vote, 163 electoral votes. Cass gets 42.5% of the vote, 127 electoral votes. So it goes to Taylor. But Taylor's going to be facing quite a few problems once he enters office. In the meantime, though, something big's happening.
Green shield.
California Gold Rush.
Yep.
In President Polk's State of the Union address in 1848, he announced confirmed the discovery of gold in California. It was discovered earlier in 1848 at Sutter's Mill. Word spread quickly. California became the center of a worldwide quest for gold. It said tens of thousands of people searched California, came to be called the 49ers, because they're heading out in 1849. There's something very interesting here about this whole process is you have all this gold being discovered in California, very rich veins, and since this is federal territory, basically it isn't owned by a king or an emperor. It's open to the people. Go and stake a claim. Basically, anybody can walk in and get this gold if they wanted to. And a lot of people,
everybody else for it.
yeah, pretty much. Horace Greeley, New York newspaper editor, said that we are on the brink of an age of gold. Saying there was as much gold in California as there was mud in the streets of New York. Others, though, were concerned with the rising materialism in American society, obsession with money, and said that, such as a poet Henry David Thoreau once said, that, quote, California is 3,000 miles closer to hell. In 1849, 80,000 gold seekers reached California. Some found fame and fortune. Some then became very, very rich off of this. Some found land. California has a lot of rich farmland, one of the major agricultural states in the Union to this day. But some found only heartache, misery, bankruptcy, and death. Dying in the mountains, dying in mine shaft collapses,
Dying from a gunshot.
yeah, dying from gunshot wounds and everything else. The city of San Francisco went from a population of 459 people at the beginning of the year to 29,000 by the end of the year. Quickly becoming the major city on the West Coast. In fact, for under the 1920s, 1930s, San Francisco was the city on the West Coast, the major city, before Los Angeles overtook it. Well, Americans quickly overwhelmed the 14,000 Mexican citizens living there in California in 1850. The 1850 census showed that Americans accounted for 68% of the population in California, including people who had been from Mexico, now Americans, and Native Americans. It also included an array of immigrants from Australia, Hawaii, England, Ireland, China, and France. Interesting enough, of all the people living in California in 1850, I'd say it's a mining, basically the whole state is a mining camp. Less than 8% of the population were women. So all these 49ers going out there, they're basically going to go, a lot of them going to strike their fortune, make it rich and go home, or bring their families out later. And most of the settlements are these boom and bust mining towns, there one day and gone the next. And the kind of women in a lot of these towns aren't exactly the kind you bring home to mama.
Mm.
In other words, they had a lot of brothels.
Yeah, they were, prostitution is very common in the West. So they're making money the really old-fashioned way. David Bitter? Like I said, just the kind of thing that respectable women don't enter mining towns. The cities rose and fell in a few months in the promise of gold. You had a lot of unstable regions, unstable economies. Crime came with problems. You have a lot of money and a lot of alcohol floating around. Always a bad combination. The English and the Americans got together, tried to outlaw foreigners, that is, people from China or France or anywhere else, Ireland especially.
Ireland.
They didn't like the Irish. They're Roman Catholic, they are poor, they say they're the lowest rung on the ladder.
And I already have enough of them at that point of view.
Yeah, but it's a lot of prejudice this age, especially against the Irish. They tried to tax and expel Mexican citizens, even though they were American citizens under the Treaty of Hidalgo. Violence with the tribes. Basically, as the miners move into the mountains, they are moving into tribal territory, and the tribes are trying to defend their territory. So, a lot of outbreaks of violence there. So, as a result, in many parts of California, it was not illegal to kill an Indian or work an Indian to death. Slavery existed in California, but it was enslaving Native Americans. But Californians insist on coming into the Union as a free state. It is, they don't want African slaves in California. But nevertheless, California leaders are soon asking for statehood, organizing free government. The New Mexico Territory is drafting a free constitution. It's trying to break itself away from Texas. The Mormons had settled in the Salt Lake City area, organizing their own free territory, claiming most of the Mexican section of the process. So you have this very deep concern here over the new balance in the Union. Okay, here at page 454. Now, Manifest Destiny, Polk and the Democrats were able to expand the territory by maintaining this idea of balance in the Union. Balance created by the Missouri Compromise. Polk argued free Oregon for slave Texas. Bring that free territory in, this slave territory, the balance is maintained, no problem. But now, with the Mexican cession, you have that whole quarter of the southwestern United States brought into the Union. This whole territory all the way out here to California. This whole area. We got Oregon here. Nothing else. No Louisiana Purchase. But you have a balance that was built for Missouri Compromise, 36-degree, 30-minute line. The idea that this whole area here in the Great Plains not ever going to become states, or not for a very long time. Try to expand that a little further with annexation of Texas and Oregon. The temporary balance is maintained. But now, with all this territory here in the Southwest, the whole nation is brought into an imbalance. How do you restore that balance between North and South? And that's this whole 1850 compromise base going to be over. How do you restore the balance between North and South? With this whole addition of all this territory right here. Some said just 36-degree, 30-minute line all the way across. But, yeah, not a lot of territory. What you got it here is basically desert, scrub brush. Not a lot's going to be becoming a state anytime soon. But California is organizing, pretend that's California, wanting this whole area as free territory. New Mexico right here wants to be free territory. Utah, Mormons want to be free territory. So you're not going to have that balance anymore. You have to be slipping increasingly out of balance between North and South. Southerners are very fearful about that. They're going to be surrounded by free states, surrounded by abolitionists on the outside, and increasing numbers of slaves on the inside, outnumbered and surrounded. That's exactly what all this is coming down to is you have two parts of the country going in two separate directions. South, maintaining a system of a plantation-style agriculture dependent on slave labor, a racial caste system. In the North, industrialization, free labor. Two sides going increasingly separate directions, increasingly irreconcilable. What direction was the nation going to take? The North, the numbers, was passing the South in every way imaginable, every conceivable measure. Northerners do not want slavery in their areas, except for one reason, increasing numbers of factory workers. Factory workers are making a good living working in these factories. They do not want slavery brought into the North because they do not want slave labor replacing them. The South, though, is stuck in its ways. A lot of people have made a lot of money off this. One thing you have to understand about questions about history, Francis points in history about the situation of the world today. Why are things the way they are or were? Because people have a vested interest in keeping things the way they are. These planters had a vested interest in maintaining that system. They were in charge of everything. They had all the money. They had all these people at their disposal to do whatever they wanted to with them. They didn't want to give that up. No matter what it was doing to the South, no matter how much it was impoverishing the rest of the South, no matter how much it was holding back the rest of the South, they were going to stay and keep things the way they were. The world was changing. They refused to change. And when the world starts changing, you have to be ready to change with it. You have to be ready to take charge of that change, or you're going to be left behind. We see that change happening in the United States today. Our economy is changing. 30, 40 years ago, you could make a good living if you just wanted to get up and have a strong back and wanted to get up in the morning. Today, you have to have a skill. You have to have a college education, or you're going to be left behind. The career you have today may not be the same career you have in 20 years. You have to be trained again.
That's what the speaker said about Arkansas that came and spoke this year.
Yep.
Why he left one that part of the Little Rock Nine.
Mm-hmm.
The same, pretty much the same comment when he moved to Atlanta because they were moving forward and Arkansas didn't want to change. Right.
If people not wanting to change, guess what happens? The world's leaving them behind. So, it comes down to this principle here, the 1850 Compromise. How are you going to maintain that balance? How are you going to reestablish that balance? Because right now the big issue is New Mexico versus Texas. New Mexico wants to break away from Texas. Half of New Mexico wants to break away from Texas. Texas doesn't want to allow that to happen. Southerners are lining up behind Texas to keep New Mexico as part of Texas, but President Taylor said, no, New Mexico has a right to go its own direction. Now Southerners are starting to see the issue as slave states being split up, making it even worse for them. So it looks like 1850, rumblings of secession starting to occur. rumblings of disunion, even civil war, not a total impossibility at this point. So how do you keep that war from happening? And northern politicians and many southern politicians are desperate to make sure that war doesn't happen. So the United States is not destroyed. You don't have thousands of lives wiped out of the war between North and South. So it comes down to Henry Clay, the 1850 Compromise. Handout here. A very important handout for your final.
That's it. Look at this guy.
Now, Clay has been responsible for a lot of compromise before that saved the Union. The Missouri Compromise, compromise over the nullification crisis, and now the 1850 Compromise, which makes me pull one more rabbit out of its hat to save the Union. It's an 8-point compromise hoping to settle all the issues over slavery once and for all. But it's going to face problems, and we'll cover that more next time.
David.